for any delay. Thankfully, technology did not disappoint, so we are good to start. We want to welcome you to AFROSAI-E's webinar series for the Environment and Sustainability Assurance Group. This is the first of 4 webinars. We are planning to hold one every quarter. And this year, our focus is strictly on issues around climate change, auditing climate change, understanding how to measure the impact of climate change in our audits. Where can we find information to help our governments be more transparent, be more value adding, and how can we generally bring value to our citizens in the AFROSAI-E region? And we are starting off with quite a strong team. We have managed to get hold of 2 very strong women in the space of climate change. And it's not a coincidence as we recently celebrated International Women's Day. So it makes so much connection to have these 2 wonderful women, colleagues who are now friends, to take us through this conversation on climate change. I'll introduce them briefly, but they will do their full introductions themselves, so I don't miss out anything. So I'm just going to be introducing them by first names, and then we shall have them take on the rest of the task. Please note that for this engagement, you are free to ask questions, but we are going to take a full Q&A session at the end of the presentations. But along the line, if you feel very strong to ask a question, feel free to put it in the comment section so we could read it, and then the facilitators will have access to it, and we shall answer them when we are able to. So thank you again for joining. If you are also able, you could also write quickly in the comment section which country you are joining in from, so we can give you a big shout out to your country. So thank you. So we're having 2 women to join us. Not in any particular order, but we have Shanaz, who is an international consultant on issues of climate change. She's done a lot of work around Asia and Africa, so she does have a good understanding of the climate situation around our region. We also have Daisy, who also I call international consultant. She works with the UNDP on issues around climate change, and they will give you full introductions when they have their sessions. But these are the 2 wonderful women who are going to be with us and are going to take us through the sessions. So thank you very much. Oh, Josie, I think that we have Josie around, the executive officer for the audit portfolio. So let me not break protocol. Maybe we could have a brief comment from Josie. I didn't see her around, so I thought I was doing something. So
Okay.
Josie, if you're around, a brief comment just from the top of AFROSAI-E. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Richard, and thank you to all our colleagues on this very important webinar. As AFROSAI-E, we are very committed to capacity building and knowledge sharing, and that's why we have got this webinar, because we know that we cannot it's not possible for us to be meeting all the time and not practical. You know, the world is changing, as you can see what's happening now. So I just want to say briefly that our focus on climate change is an overarching area for all our 26 SAIs. And this is because we need to support our SAIs to support their governments as well, so that they create value for the citizens. We also need to support our side to track expenditure, especially within the climate change space, as the area is noted. Yeah, we know that the donors, our institutional partners, they are interested in this area. And so it is important that our sites also do the audits of this area, and they need some knowledge on what climate change is all about. And when the audits are done, it is very important that our audits are of quality. Sometimes we cry that our audits are not being our audit recommendations, they are not being implemented, but maybe it's the nature of the recommendations. So our capacity building also assists the auditors to produce quality recommendations that are value adding to the overall transparency and accountability drive to our countries. And also our audits, the audits through this capacity building will also help governments to decide on policies that either affect government business or are affected by government business within the climate change conversations. So when we do this capacity building, we expect our sites to be able to independently audit these climate interventions and expenditure for better use of domestic and foreign financing in the climate change. And as Richard has already pointed out and also highlighted some of our esteemed colleagues who are here with us on the webinar, we welcome you, and we are really excited from AFROSAI-E to have you. And as Richard has said, we've become friends over the period, and you continue to agree to help us on this journey so that the auditors in our region and beyond can have a good understanding of the audit issues around climate change. So just to say that this is the first of 4 webinars. So we look forward to also having you in the other 3 webinars. This is the first of the 4 webinars that are dedicated to understanding and triggering some audit action around climate change. So I hand over to you, Richard, and please let us all listen, ask questions in the chats, and let us all just be active during this webinar. Thank you so much, Richard.
Thank you so much, Josie. Yeah, she always comes with a smile. So thank you, Josie. Not to take too much of the time, I think I'm going to hand over to Daisy. Daisy, if you're around, you can start sharing, and then we kick off straight with the presentation. Over to you, Daisy.
Thank you. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, I can see your presentation.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Thank you, colleagues. And it's such a good attendance. Thank you, colleagues, for attending. My name is Daisy. I'm a regional climate policy advisor. I'm based at the UNDP Regional Office for Africa in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. So yes, I will talk more about climate. And I know that Shanaz, my colleague, is strong on both climate and public finance. So please direct all the questions to Shanaz. Anyway, let me start by saying, well, somehow I don't know. Okay, what is climate public expenditure? and I'm sure most of you already know, like Richard says, we are starting with a theoretical session, and which will lead to more, exchange with other sides. I think you saw Philippines here. I think they will be available in the next webinar. So what's climate public expenditure? It is all government spending that contributes to climate change mitigation and adaptation. Or it supports enabling a climate governance system. So spending that supports a climate governance system. Let's start with mitigation. I made a mistake. I wrote the sectors. I should have I should have asked colleagues to write in the chat what you think are the key mitigation sectors, because we want this session to be very interactive. So mitigation expenditure, it's expenditure that is aimed at reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And as most of you know, this is a common narrative. Africa contributes only 3 to 4% of global greenhouse gas emissions. But it is still important for us to mitigate climate change. So what are the key climate sectors? Energy, for example, energy. That's where we have most greenhouse gas emissions, either energy generation or distribution. Industry, IPPU is industry, industrial production and product use. Our industries, I think you see even the chimneys spewing gas. Waste, our waste, and most of our cities, particularly capitals, the way we manage our waste. Sometimes we don't have proper waste collection systems. We end up burning the waste, and if we burn the waste, they release gases into the atmosphere that tampers with weather and climate. Agriculture, the fertilizers that we use, particularly nitrous oxides. Forestry, it can either absorb if we plant or reforestation, or planting new areas, afforestation. If we deforest, if we cut down trees, then we release gases. Then we have buildings, particularly energy efficiency in our buildings, the way we design our buildings. Are we wasting energy? And also, what can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
What building materials are we using? Transport, I think we all know the exhaust fumes that we are exposed to. So that's on mitigation. Then adaptation expenditure is expenditure that is aimed at strengthening our resilience and reducing our vulnerability to climate impacts. So we are adjusting systems here, either our social systems, our economic systems, or our ecological systems, to cope with the current and future climate. It's important to mention future climate. For example, if you are designing your roads, you are supposed to know, like in 10 years, how much rainfall are we going to receive? That will help you in 10, 20. Climate looks at long time horizons. In 10, 20, even up to 2050, what are our rainfall patterns going to be? There are models to do that, and we have climate scientists there are many disciplines in climate change. You are on the finance side. There are scientists who actually work on models to model what will happen in 2050. So thank God it doesn't fall. It's not our responsibility. We do have Met officers who are responsible for that. So you are supposed to take that information into consideration when you are designing your roads. Your civil engineer is supposed to take that information. I worked in Sudan, and there was like a rare extreme weather event. Khartoum, it doesn't rain that much, but that particular year it rained. And the design of the roads was such that, well, we don't really expect much rain in Khartoum. So there wasn't much drainage. I tell you, we didn't go to work for 3 days, I think. So it's important. My point is, it's important to incorporate future climate in designing projects, or even in investment finance. So what are the key sectors? Water, I've already mentioned. Water is very important. And the theme for this year's Africa Union Summit, and we are continuing with the theme, is on water and sanitation. Then, of course, I've talked about roads. I gave an example. It's infrastructure, but you can also have flood control infrastructure that helps us to deal with drought, like for water storage, water harvesting, but also our ecosystems and biodiversity. Human health is very important because sometimes when we have, let's say, pollution, the diseases that we are affected. Let's say there are floods and all our freshwater systems are polluted. Even if it's dry, if it's too dry, we have maybe some bacteria in the dust. Those who know, like meningitis is transmitted through dust. So and look at the relationship. It's related to climate change. Many people would not even see that kind of relationship. Of course, I think we have coastal cities here. I saw that we have Sierra Leone, Tanzania, all our DAs, our Freetown. It's important. I mean, coastal zone erosion is happening. Salt intrusion is happening. How do we direct our budget to address that? Then governance, all those blue terms, I want to define them all. Governance, for us, when we say governance, we are looking at what policies. So expenditure that is directed at formulation of the right policies or review of policies, laws and regulations, institutions. Let's say if we have environmental management agency, it doesn't even have to be environment related, but any institution that somehow has to do with reducing our vulnerability to climate change. There is also what we call cross-cutting or enabling expenditure. It's related to the governance that I was talking about. So the expenditure on policies, laws, and institutions, on data, on climate data, on gathering data. I talked about modeling. You need, lots of data to do modeling. You also need historical data. So what are your archives looking like so that you have accurate models? So early warning is really important. And so it enables early action. If it means there are floods coming, then you warn your communities. They are then moved to higher ground, or you have community structures that can respond, the early responders, before people from the capital or development partners come and help them. We also have what we call direct expenditure. So expenditure where the primary objective is climate related, or indirect, we are looking at secondary climate benefit, but again, it's significant. So that's the definition, colleagues. We have climate frameworks under the Paris Agreement, because if we are talking climate, we are talking about the Paris Agreement. And I hope everyone is familiar with the Paris Agreement. It's not very long, it's short. If you haven't looked at it as an auditor, after this, please just Google Paris Agreement. And particularly go to the where it says finance. So the first one is nationally determined contributions. I'm sure you've heard about them. These are iterated or detailed every 5 years. So many countries are working on the third iteration now. We call them NDC 3.0. And some countries have already submitted. I see Kenya here. Kenya, they have submitted. I'm not sure about Botswana, Rwanda. Yeah, but many countries have submitted. As UNDP, we support NDC revision. NDCs is where you are saying this is what we are going to do to reduce emissions based on this baseline. So you have your tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. Hello, there's somebody talking. Okay, so you are saying so you should have a baseline. It really depends on a country. That's why it's called nationally determined. So what South Africa is doing should not be the same as what South Sudan is doing, because the context is completely different. So this is what we have to understand. In fact, I've put what we call common but differentiated responsibility and respective capabilities. That principle is very important in climate change because we all have different circumstances and we all have different capacities. So each party to the Paris Agreement is supposed to do the best that they can based on their capacities and on their local context. So why are NDCs important? NDC is a political document. It's a pronouncement that you are making. You are saying this is the development path that we are going to adopt as a country towards low carbon and climate resilient development. So it's a new development paradigm. We do not look at development now the same way that we looked at it 100 years ago, because we have learned our lessons in terms of what, let's say, industrialization does to human health. In some countries, let's say China or let's say India, you need air purifiers to be comfortable in your own apartment. We've learned all that. Particulate matter, lots of dust, like construction dust. Here in Addis, I'm sure some of you who've been here, there's lots of construction. Whilst it is good, we then have lots of particulate matter in the air. And if we breathe that, that has impacts on our health. What's again important to auditors is the very first NDCs that we did as Africa, we did not cost our actions. First of all, we have priority sectors. So as a country, what are your priority sectors, both mitigation and adaptation? And what actions are you going to undertake? And those actions, what's the cost? So in the end, an NDC, you are then supposed to say the total. Some countries haven't done that, some have. But let's say per sector, you have some actions, you cost them. So the total, based on our priority sectors, the total is going to be this trillion or this billion for Kenya or for Malawi. This is an improvement. Like I said, the first time we did not cost our actions. And these are special skills that we particularly do not have as Africa. And this is one of the gaps in terms of NDC iteration. all that expertise of costing, of doing cost-benefit analysis, of even prioritizing. So what then you say in this document, when you have put some figures, you then say we are able to do this using our own funding. So we call that conditional financing. And we are able to do this only if we get international support. And we call that unconditional. So you should not be held accountable if you do not manage to get the international support that you are supposed to, if it's an unconditional target. I hope I'm being clear. Then in climate, we have what we call means of implementation. 3 means of implementation. Finance, I've put it because today we are dealing with finance, but also capacity, and I should pluralize it because there are many capacities that we'll talk about. And then technology. Technology is very important. If we are talking of, let's say, manufacturing processes, or even, let's say, e-mobility, electric vehicles and all that. What's also important, the last one I put there, is that okay, I just mentioned nationally determined contribution, I guess because I said they are political. This is what you put forward as a country, and it's informed your adaptation actions. It's a short document, right, the NDCs, but your national adaptation is a more detailed document where you are talking about your adaptation sectors and what you are going to do in those adaptation sectors. And then in the longer term, up to 2050 horizon, you have what we call your long-term strategy. What do you want to do up to 2050? Some countries already have this, some do not have. So all those three, it's like a 3-legged pot. NDCs, NAPs, and LTSs, they are the key frameworks under the climate promise document, under the Paris Agreement. So as an auditor, these are the frameworks to look out for. And these are fortunately available on the internet. So if I will show you later, if you click, you can see your country's NDC or all of the 3 NDCs. If you click on your website. Then those 3 have to align with your national development strategies, and we give them different names in different countries. Where does climate public expenditure appear? Budget lines in sector ministries, development programs, and public investment projects, down to local government budgets. So sometimes in some countries we call them district budgets or even municipal budgets. Then of course we implement donor-funded projects. Governments do implement donor-funded projects. So this is where it appears. But we also have tax incentives. For example, South Africa has a carbon tax. But we also even have subsidies, like when you say solar components, no duty on solar components. Again, that's climate related. Then we have disaster risk financing mechanisms. If there is a flooding in KwaZulu-Natal or in Maputo or in what do you call it, or even in Senegal, for example, what financing mechanisms do we use? That does constitute climate finance. That's where you can see it. And some of it is under the president's office in some countries. So why do we track climate public expenditure? Like how much are we spending? Where is it spent on? And what results are we achieving? The impact of that finance. I think it's important, one, for transparency and accountability. It clarifies how much we are allocating and how much we are spending. Are we diverting any funds that are meant for adaptation or mitigation? Are we misclassifying what's supposed to be mitigation? We are calling it adaptation. Then it just builds trust, I mean, with citizens, with let's say you provide your parliamentarians with evidence for budget oversight. Then ensuring alignment with national commitments. I've already talked about national commitments under the Paris Agreement, but down to sector climate plans. One sector which is important for us, very much important for us, is agriculture. So let's say in agriculture sector, what are the plans? So is expenditure aligned with what we are saying, let's say for our agriculture or water sector? Then we have, of course, improving effectiveness and efficiency of climate spending. Are we spending on the right, are we doing the right thing, or are we doing things right? That's important. And as auditors, I know you are used to this. So we can then identify the gaps, the needs, the overlaps. I mean, we can easily identify underperforming or low impact projects. And this helps us also to target. The third one is very important. The moment you can demonstrate, you have the capacity to track climate public expenditure, and you say, this is what we allocated, this is what we've used it for what, and these are the results, these are the impact, you are able to attract other sources of financing because you are accountable. Not only that, well, this applies maybe to private financing. I mean, you are able, or even donor financing, you are able to demonstrate to a donor and then there's trust. But also for multilateral funds. Multilateral funds, I'm assuming all of you know them under the agreement, the Global Environment Facility. The Green Climate Fund is very, very important. If you are looking at it as higher volumes of funding, then we have the Adaptation Fund and the new Loss and Damage Fund, which is very important for us in Africa. All those, we call them vertical funds. Why is it important to leverage those sources of finance? I'm talking about the vertical funds. You have to put in, you have to put in money. We call it co-financing, and it's cash as a government. So it's important to know how much you are putting in. If they scrutinize your climate public expenditure and how much you are putting in, that will help you to access much more resources. We are talking of some projects that maybe are even 90 million, and if we have some let's say GCF, such projects really will have impact compared to a 2 million project, what we've been implementing. But multilateral development banks financing, you are able to leverage that. Then supporting, of course, evidence-based budgeting and planning. This is important in terms of integrating your climate priorities into annual and midterm budgeting. Of course, informed investment decision and prioritization. I've already talked about gaps and needs. I have also talked about misclassification of is this adaptation, is this mitigation, or I have talked about use of climate matters, direct and indirect climate expenditure, and of course budget tagging and taxonomies. But this whole thing of tracking public expenditure, it really encourages coordination in government, and it encourages harmonized reporting systems and consistency between planning, budgeting, and reporting. But more so, these three ministries that normally work in silos: environment, ministries of environment, finance, and line ministries. I've talked about the key sectors, the key ministries, let's say water, agriculture, health, all those sectors I've mentioned in mitigation and adaptation. You find that if we implement this, then there is better coordination. So climate public expenditure tracking, it's really a diagnostic exercise, and it will help you to correct the course correction. Where are we going wrong? What are we doing right? You reinforce what you are doing right. Then there are capacities that are important. Capacities to access, I've talked about vertical funds. The criteria is very rigorous, fiduciary standards. They examine even your human resources systems, your procurement systems. But we do have government departments or ministries that have succeeded in being accredited to the Green Climate Fund. In fact, that's the ideal situation, where as governments we can access directly instead of using intermediaries. That should be our vision. So we have countries, let's say Rwanda, the Ministry of Finance is accredited. I saw accreditation recently. I think we have some national entities accredited in Nigeria. We have lots of and well, not lots, but sometimes this is where we do have capacity gaps, and we rely on intermediaries. So funding coming to Zambia has to go through maybe UNEP or UNDP or FAO. Like I said, ideally it's better for government of Zambia to have either a national entity or a ministry accredited, and they deal with GCF directly. That will build their capacities. Like I said, there are different capacities to access, to implement. I think I've worked with local authorities, for example. They complain, we don't have money. But if you support them, they are unable to spend. And some of us who work for development agencies, in the fourth quarter, we are stuck with unspent money. And I think as auditors, it's quite common. And we call it absorption capacity. So it is a capacity that needs to be built to spend. And most of the bottlenecks, particularly for spending, in most cases, mostly our procurement systems. So we have to strengthen the procurement function. Then, of course, the ability to monitor, report, and verify climate finance. So what's the role of Supreme Audit institutions? Verifying accuracy of reported climate finance. So making sure that reported climate expenditures are correctly classified, like I said, and that figures reported to international organizations or bodies are accurate. And then spending aligns with approved budgets and project objectives. So this, in the end, improves the credibility of our national climate finance reporting. The second one, I think that's what you do on of course, on a daily basis in terms of performance audits, assessing the effectiveness of climate expenditure tracking systems. To make sure that the government has a functional climate budget tagging system, for example, and not all our governments do have. I know a few governments maybe have already completed, like Namibia, Eswatini, and it's also good to learn from others. I know I facilitated, well, we do that as UNDP, just facilitating government to government peer learning and exchange. But to make sure that ministries apply climate markers consistently, then we do have data flows between ministries, Ministry of Finance, and planning bodies are reliable, and then monitoring of systems for climate results are adequate. You find that sometimes results don't trickle down to the person in the village. If we are reporting about how much is flowing to Botswana, and maybe you go to a rural village, you wonder how credible that figure is, because in most cases, for some of us who visit field projects and we interact with rural population, we then end up, when we come back to the office on Monday, we get very, very depressed because we don't really see a difference in people's lives. So it's important that there is impact. And normally audit recommendations do strengthen the climate finance ecosystem. So we really need strong and agile auditors. Examining alignment with national climate commitments. We spend a lot of time talking about NDCs, NAPs, long-term strategies, sectoral climate plans, and also our national development strategy. So it's juxtapositioning all these documents. Are they talking to each other? And is expenditure aligning with what we are saying in these documents? Again, I've talked about enhancing accountability and transparency, and it's important because it increases public confidence. And like I said, it really facilitates our work as auditors with Parliament, where we provide Parliament with evidence for effective oversight. And it does identify weaknesses in governance, in controls, or in coordination. So this really demonstrates democratic accountability. This will strengthen democratic accountability. I've already talked about how, if we take this seriously, tracking of climate public expenditure, how it then enables us to work as ministries, and I particularly mentioned ministries of environment, finance, and planning, how we then work together smoothly and how we begin to understand each other, how we do not work as silos. Then, of course, I've talked about it's the role of the auditors to identify gaps, risks, and opportunities so that we ensure deliverance of maximum value. And the last one, although it's last, is very important because we know that our government, we have very limited fiscal space. And some of our countries are sinking in debt. So it's important to get external finance. So if we get this right, it will strengthen our national readiness for international finance from those vertical funds or from international public or from private sector and other innovative sources of finance. So it is really important because it supports national resource mobilization, and we do really need large-scale finance to make an impact on the people, on the citizens of our countries. In conclusion, climate public expenditure represents critical investment in national resilience and low carbon development. Tracking this expenditure, like I said, ensures transparency, efficiency, alignment with national commitments, and access to external finance. And SAIs play a vital role by verifying data accuracy, assessing system effectiveness, supporting better governance, and ensuring accountability for climate public spending. Don't feel discouraged. I know most of our governments, we haven't reached there. It's a journey. It's a reform, and reforms take a long time. I guess Asia Pacific is quite advanced, as Shanaz will talk about it. And in the next sessions, we will invite some of the countries, the size from those countries, to share experience with us on their journeys. And you will notice that it's also an iterative process. And they started long back, and some of them are already there. And they've been able to mobilize large-scale financing, which we in Africa have not been able to do. Very little private finance is flowing to Africa, yet we are the most vulnerable to climate change. As I am talking now, we have floods in many countries in our continent. And if we were to do this right, we would be able to solve that. Thank you. Thank you. I hope it wasn't too long, but thank you for listening. Thanks a lot. Over to you, Richard.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Daisy. Yes, and that was a very great eye-opening conversation, especially around the things that auditors need to look out for. I picked up a few things, but we're going to discuss all these things after when we open up the conversation for the colleagues to ask questions. We have a few questions that have already come through. We have taken note of them. So I want to encourage colleagues, while the presentations go on, kindly put your questions in the chat box for anything you want more clarification on. So when we are done with the straight presentations, we will then have some time for Q&A where we would try our possible best to answer all questions that arise. And if we have questions after the questions, we'll still try and answer them. So thank you very much, Daisy. Please stay on. We shall take a presentation from Shanaz, who would focus on the finance part as well. And she also has a few experienced things she has to say. She's worked in Africa, she's worked around Asia, and she's been around for a while in climate change. So, Shanaz, over to you.
Great, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be with you all here this morning. And thank you so much to AFROSAI-E and UNDP for the kind invitation to participate in this important event. So I'm going to share with you a little bit more about climate budget tagging, including some of the main methodologies that have been applied, and just looking at a couple of country examples and experience in developing countries. So climate-sensitive PFM really is about adapting existing PFM processes to make them climate-sensitive, thereby supporting climate policies. So entry points cover the entire budget cycle, as you can see on the screen, and include strategic planning and fiscal framework, budget preparation, budget execution and accounting, control and audit. So the framework I've used is actually from the UNDP 2025 report, which links the annual budget cycle to occasional evaluation and review cycle, which I think is most important for the discussions today. So as you can see, information from climate budget tagging or green tagging, as well as green performance monitoring, really should inform midterm and ex-post program evaluations, as well as reporting under the UNFCCC process. This, of course, should all inform policy revisions, which again feed back into the annual budget cycle. So today, as I mentioned, we'll be focusing on climate budget tagging. So it's identified in the framework under budget execution and accounting, but it is also relevant for budget preparation because tags are usually done during the budget formulation stage. So the key question is, why do we need this tool? So it does address one key challenge, which is that climate expenditure is spread across government ministries, departments, and agencies as part of its routine development expenditure. So climate budget tagging provides a tool that can help to identify, classify, weight, and mark climate relevant expenditure in the government's budget system, enabling the estimation, monitoring, and tracking of those expenditures. So the reasons for adopting climate budget tagging, or the objectives of adopting it, vary across countries. But there is a World Bank 2021 report that did a global review and found that some of the key reasons was to enhance accountability and transparency by enabling the reporting of climate-related expenditures. The second was to identify financing gaps and investment opportunities. It was also to align the budget with climate change policy priorities and basically incentivize the mainstreaming of climate change in the planning and budgeting process, to raise awareness and communication across government, also to track budget execution and monitoring, and finally to mobilize domestic and international finance, because by showing how much you're investing in climate can actually improve your negotiating position. So the figure there that you see on the screen right now outlines the functions of climate budget tagging during the budget process. So a comprehensive system really should serve three key functions. The first function is to influence program design and budget formulation. So during planning, this includes the use of climate appraisal and climate being linked to strategic priorities and key performance indicators. During budget preparation, this would include ex-ante budget tagging, meaning that the tags are applied before the budget is approved. And this information actually being used to inform budget negotiations between the Ministry of Finance and participating ministries, departments, and agencies. The second function is to inform budget approval. So this means that this information from climate budget tagging is actually included in the budget documentation that is submitted to the legislator for approval. The third function, which I suppose is the most important for this discussion, is on evaluation of expenditure trends and climate policy outcomes. So this means during budget execution and audit, there is reporting on actual climate expenditure, but also the use of climate sensitive audits, whether it is a special audit or climate change being mainstreamed into the regular audits that are taken by the Supreme Audit institutions. And then finally, we have evaluation and policy review, which includes ex post climate public expenditure reviews. So this would be ideally the three functions it would serve. However, in practice, this is very difficult to achieve. And experience shows that most countries tend to start with ex post evaluations in the form of climate public expenditure and institutional reviews, which then lay the technical groundwork for further reforms. So some of the advantages of starting with an ex post tagging approach is that it can be carried out relatively quickly with the involvement of a small group of stakeholders, and it offers really a comprehensive government-wide overview of climate spending, which can serve as a benchmark. With ex-ante climate budget tagging, it means the tags are applied during budget preparation, and this requires broader capacity building across government, and it should really be implemented in a phased approach that requires that usually actually takes 3 to 5 years to fully roll out. So just to highlight that the third function really can promote or support the effective implementation of climate budget tagging. And although the Philippines is not here today, the Philippines Commission on Audit, the two things that they did was firstly, they did climate sensitive audits that looked at policy alignment. So were national policies aligned with the NDCs and National Adaptation Plan? The second thing they did was there are regulations in place that require all ministries, departments, and agencies to tag their budgets or to tag climate in their budgets. And their audits basically looked at compliance with this regulation. So we found that there was a huge increase in the number of agencies or ministries, departments, and agencies participating and actually tagging their budgets because of the role the Philippines Commission on Audit was playing. So in terms of climate budget tagging methodologies, it's important to note that there's no single approach, and therefore climate expenditure estimates are not directly comparable across countries. As mentioned before, it really should respond to the country's national context that includes climate change policies and plans, existing PFM systems in place, and institutional capacity. I will just quickly cover some of the main methodologies that have been used that are particularly relevant at the national level. So the first is the OECD DAC Rio markers. This was developed to guide the OECD DAC members reporting on development assistance in support of the Rio Conventions on climate change, biological diversity, and desertification. It provides a standard definition which allows for consolidation and comparison. So the scores are based on the program objectives. So it has 3 categories. Principle is this expenditure was primarily, or the principal objective of it is to address climate change objectives or contribute to climate change objectives. In practice, not a very small share of the national expenditure will actually be principal expenditure. The second category is significant. It means that although climate is not the primary objective, this expenditure still makes a significant contribution towards climate objectives. And usually this is a larger share. So things like, agriculture and rural development, although it may still, or although it was not primarily designed or made to address climate change, it still, makes a significant contribution towards achieving climate-related objectives in terms of increasing resilience. And 0 means that it doesn't make any contribution. So this is actually the foundation of a lot of the methodologies we see. The second approach is the climate public expenditure and institutional review methodology. So as I mentioned before, in some countries, ex post evaluation or climate public expenditure and institutional reviews will come before a country decides to introduce routine climate budget tagging. Some make use of the OECD Rio markers and others make use of policy definitions. So one of the key challenges is that there is no sort of agreed definition in terms of climate change adaptation, although now we see that there's a lot of efforts to come up with, more consensus on the issue. It is more flexible than the OECD DAC Rio markers in the sense that it responds to the national context. And with this in mind, it allows for more degrees of relevance. So for instance, you could have, low, high, medium, marginal. So it gives the country that flexibility in terms of identifying its climate relevance expenditure. The next one I'm going to mention is the EU taxonomy, and I'm mentioning it because it does seem to be influencing some countries, particularly you see the push towards extending climate budget tagging systems to include negative expenditure. So in the EU taxonomy, it recognizes green activities as those that do no significant harm, meet minimum social safeguards, and make a substantial, not marginal contribution to reaching the EU's environment objectives. So, for example, Rwanda last year did a very small pilot in one ministry that looked at negative expenditure, which I think is an interesting development. And of course, there's the Multilateral Development Bank joint methodology, which basically provides a harmonized principles and approach to tracking financial flows from multilateral development banks. Of course, there are more methodologies, but I've just highlighted the ones that I think are most relevant for the discussion today. Oh gosh. Sorry, technology. Let's try it. Let's try it this way. Okay, so in terms of experience in developing countries with climate budget tagging, so what I have here is a map which identifies the countries that have introduced or piloted climate budget tagging at the national level. This is based on a UNDP 2022 review. So it is somewhat outdated. So in terms of the list of African countries, I have tried to extend it to include the countries that we know have since then pursued these reforms. So countries that have introduced or piloted climate budget tagging in Africa include Ethiopia, Eswatini, Ghana, Kenya, Mauritius, Namibia, Nigeria, Rwanda, Seychelles, South Africa, and Uganda. There may be other countries which are doing so that have not been mentioned. Also, countries in Asia Pacific, as mentioned by Daisy, they have like a decade of experience with implementing such reforms. Countries such as the Philippines, Indonesia, India, and others. Also, countries in Europe and CIS. So I think one particularly famous CBT system is the French system. And then, of course, you have 5 countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, including Mexico and Peru. So just to delve more into some of the details of these systems, I have 2 examples from Africa. So the first example is from Ghana. And I've used it because it is a good example with climate budget tagging has been rolled out at both the national and subnational level. So it's one of the most mature systems, I think, on the continent. So climate budget tagging is integrated into the IFMIS, which allows for the monitoring of climate expenditure. And according to the Ministry of Finance, the information generated from climate budget tagging is actually used to inform inform the management of resource allocation to climate action. It is to share with relevant partners to help identify financing gaps. It also helps to incentivize ministries, departments, and agencies to make budget allocations towards climate action. And it allows MDAs to engage with other stakeholders on climate finance. So, as I mentioned before, really by strengthening that negotiating position, by being able to showcase all the work you're already doing on the subject. So the Ghana CBT system builds on their 2015 Climate Public Expenditure and Institutional Review methodology. So it has 3 categories of climate relevance, which is high, medium, and low. It uses a weighted system. So high expenditure is given a weight of 100%, medium expenditure is given a weight of 50%, and low expenditure is given a weight of 20%. It includes both mitigation and adaptation expenditures. And because it's integrated into the IFMIS, government officials have access to this data. But they also have developed a climate dashboard, which contains information on climate change finance. The second system I would like to touch on is Mauritius. So they have piloted climate budget tagging and developed a roadmap for introducing climate budget tagging in a phased approach over 3 years. So their full system will take into account climate change, the environment, and disaster risk reduction. So this integrated approach, particularly that looks at disaster risk reduction, is important, particularly for small island developing states. Their methodology is aligned with the OECD DAC Rio markers and the UNDRR CBT guide. So the first phase of their pilot, which took place last year, looked at climate change adaptation and mitigation only, and it also only considered principal expenditure. So that expenditure that was primarily introduced to address climate change. And they do have plans in this phased approach to introduce the other categories, including environment and disaster risk reduction, as well as other levels of relevance, including significant and marginal expenditure. So public climate finance that has been tagged is reported in the budget documentation that is submitted to the legislator for approval. Okay, so just to conclude, climate budget tagging is still relatively new and in the piloting phase in most African countries that have adopted related reforms. So far, it has had limited impact on planning and budgeting. And this is not just for Africa, but just for developing countries as a whole. So one of the challenges is that it's applied ex post to programs and expenditure. So after they've been planned and budgeted, making it too late to inform resource allocation. A second challenge is that not all countries that have introduced routine climate budget tagging as part of the annual budget process actually regularly report on this information. So it's not being used by ministries, agencies, departments. It's not being reviewed by the legislator, etc. It's just sitting there. So some countries are pursuing or considering related reforms. One that's emerging is climate geotagging. And an example is Bangladesh, is where they want to link resource allocation or transfers from the national government to regions, to the regions that are most vulnerable to climate change impacts. A second approach that is emerging is to use artificial intelligence for tagging, or AI tagging. And this is really to help build consistency in how tags are applied, to help overcome some of the capacity challenges that countries are facing. And Indonesia is considering this approach. And maybe just to say as well that the focus of early reforms perhaps was on upstream PFM processes and establishing systems to support planning, budgeting. Sorry, this. Okay. So just to say that early reforms were mainly on upstream PFM processes and establishing systems to support planning and budgeting of climate expenditure. And we find now that the focus has been shifted to strengthening accountability and improving the efficiency and effectiveness of public finance in delivering climate policy outcomes. And I know that Supreme Orders institutions have already been working on this for several years and building capacity to be able to respond to this. So thank you so much. I'll be happy to take any questions you may have.
Right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Shanaz. I finally get to see your face. Thank you. All right. So thank you very much, colleagues. This has been a rapid fire presentation. I'm sure if we had 3 or 4 days, we still would have been able to go through these presentations in a much slower version. But like we said in the introduction, we are building capacity for ourselves to be able to do this. So it's just like in the university setting where we are introduced to the subject, we're introduced to tools, and then we have to go do a bit more reading to help ourselves go on. There are a few questions that were put up in the chat, but before I go that, I see a few hands. I see Chikwanda. I think Chikwanda's hand is up. Chikwanda, you can ask a question so that we can go through the questions and then read those out. Can we hear you, Chikwanda? Put your mic. Hello, Chikwanda? Hello?
Okay, good morning.
Hi.
Okay, let me just revert in a minute. Sorry for that. Morning, Richard. I'll type in the question.
You type in the question. It's okay, you can ask it. It's fine. Otherwise, while we wait for Chikwanda to type in the question, there were some questions in the chat box. Let me start from the very first one. It was from Issa Jallo, who wanted to find out, I guess this will be for Daisy, the difference between the NDC and the National Adaptation Plan. If there's any difference at all, why should we be worried about both NDC and the National Adaptation Plan? So Daisy, maybe we can take this one quickly while we adjust for the other question.
Thank you. I said the NDC is a very, very short document. I have put the link there in the chat section, so you can click there and check your country NDC. So it's not as detailed. So it's like a summary document. It's a political document, right? So your adaptation actions are actually much more detailed in your national adaptation plan. And then your mitigation are much more detailed in your long-term strategy. So ideally, what's supposed to happen is that your NDC is supposed to take figures from those two documents to cover both mitigation and adaptation. I hope it's clear, Issa. If it's not, please, yeah. I
Sure.
hope I made
I
it clear. But it's a building block. The NAP is the NAP and long-term strategy. Both are building blocks to an NDC. But the document that's most referred to, of course, is the NDC. That's the political document. Thank you.
Right. Right. Isa says it's clear. Thank you very much, Daisy. There's a question from Pacific, who is also coming in from Rwanda, and he says, for this very important subject we're discussing, basically in auditing we're running, he says two functions, but we have three functions basically: performance auditors, financial auditors, and those who look at compliance issues. So in terms of tracking finance, he wants to find out, where does it really fall? Are we looking at those value for money performance auditors, or we're looking at financial auditors who are simply checking the accuracy of government expenditure? I'm sure, Shanaz, you can help us with this question.
I think both. It's about, I think, integrating it into, I think, both functions, which play an important role. So the first, of course, is ensuring that those resources that were, allocated towards climate were actually used for their intended purpose, but also ensuring that that expenditure is achieving its intended objectives or purpose and contributing to climate policy outcomes. So definitely, it would be both.
Sure. I totally agree with you. This can be handled with all the three methodologies. We need to know what was spent, how it was spent, and if there are impacts of that expenditure. And maybe just to jump the gun a little bit at this point, is one of the issues we'll be discussing for our next webinar. Beyond the numbers, beyond all the climate numbers and everything, what really is happening? In the presentations, Daisy mentioned that sometimes we get to the field and we are surprised by what is happening, despite all the great numbers we're churning out on our climate action. But towards the end of the session, I'll give you a bit more on what will happen on the next webinar. Colleagues, we are still open we have a few more minutes to take a question or two for the colleagues. Don't let these very educated women go away without questions, guys. Let's ask them very hard-hitting questions.
Richard.
In the meantime, the presentations. Hi, Theophila, please go ahead.
Yes, I realized that I had logged in using Chikwanda's name. So when you're calling for Chikwanda for a question, that was actually mine, and I had to change my name.
Oh, sorry. That's fine.
Yes.
That's
So
fine.
yeah.
Please go on.
So yeah. Good morning, everyone. My question and my concern really on this subject matter is, in as much as NDCs are closely linked and important to the audit of climate change, I think we should also be able to link them heavily to the Goal 13, that is the SDG 13, and also the related targets therein. Because if you look at the way the targets are coming out on Goal 13, and also the goal and the targets, the way they are sitting, I think we really have to closely, if we have to come up with all government approach to climate change, I think maybe I might have missed because I joined in, I think 10 minutes later, if at all the SDGs were also part of the key reference or that we can use in the auditing of climate change. So I thought that maybe that should have also been talked about heavily and discussed on in other than these other key issues that have been discussed here. That was just my thought. I submit.
Thank you very much, Theophila. And yeah, I think generally all conversations around climate change, climate financing, typically is drawn from the bigger conversation with the SDGs, and in our space, we don't just look at the SDGs, we also go beyond it to look at the African Agenda 2063. So those connections are key, and they always need to be considered. But I don't know if maybe Daisy or Shanaz will have anything to say on this contribution from Theophila. Yes, Daisy.
Yes, Theophila is very right. I mean, I think of course, I mentioned the three frameworks, but I also mentioned alignment with your national development strategy. And I should have mentioned alignment with SDGs as well. So Theophila is very right. Of course, SDG 13 being the main one on climate action. But by the way, climate cuts across all SDGs. So if we are looking at, let's say, okay, this year we have the Africa Regional Forum for Sustainable Development. So we are looking at SDG 6, which is water, SDG 7, which is energy, SDG 11, which is cities and settlements, SDG 9, which is industry, innovation and infrastructure. And of course, the last SDG, which is 17 on partnerships. So if we are talking about the others, they are not SDG 13, but industry. We are talking about industry decarbonization. I talked about IPPU, isn't it? Being a key mitigation sector. So you should look at it that way. SDG 6 is not SDG 13, but we are talking water. And I've said that water is a key adaptation sector. So you should look at target water sector climate policy plans for that sector. So we are not restricting, Theophila, we are not restricting ourselves, of course, just to SDG 13. That's why climate is very challenging, because it's cross-cutting. Industry, we are looking at industry decarbonization. And if we are not serious about it, we may not be able to trade internationally. I think you've heard about carbon border adjustment mechanisms. We may not be able to sell our iron, our steel, our cement to the EU, for example, because they look at your carbon footprint. And that's important if we are in the climate discourse of a country. So we can say which countries are most exposed. Let's see, Mozambique, for example, iron and steel. So aluminium, such countries, Cameroon, all those countries will be affected. So don't just look at SDG 13. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daisy. Yeah, all the SDGs have a kind of interconnectivity, and it makes total sense that you don't simply focus on one of the SDGs while looking at cross-cutting issues like climate change. In fact, climate change affects everything. It affects our food, our ability um, to provide funding or support for those who want to take out of poverty. It affects almost everything. So it's important that your NDCs first align to the SDGs or to these global frameworks, and then we can find out whether these are also aligned to the national development plans, which are domesticated along the lines of the SDGs, and it makes more easy looking at them. There are still a few questions. Let me just go quickly to them. There's one from Enam. Enam is from Sudan. Enam is asking if there's any guidance or checklist that can improve the skill of auditors in climate change task. I guess this is primarily a question to ask in AFROSAI-E. Yes, we do have some trainings. We do offer training. It could be requested on an in-country basis, but on a yearly basis, we offer training in what we call the coordinated audits, where we select a particular SDG target and we offer training on how to audit them. But what we have said is that in all of our trainings, we want to now incorporate the issues of climate change. So this is just a starter. When we run these trainings, we are now going to incorporate these issues of climate finance tracking, climate change, NDC adaptation, and alignment into those trainings. So yes, there are some guidances available at the international level, at the INTOSAI level. AFROSAI is also working on developing some guidance out of those audits we have already conducted, and the trainings still continue. So we'll be very happy to find Sudan as part of these trainings going forward. Colleague, let me also state quickly that we have posted in the chat section the presentations that were made this morning by the colleagues. And we are happy for you to go through them and then get the authority to check on some more information. There is a question here from Obolokile Kapano, and it says, what distinguishes climate change, environment, and disaster risk reduction? And she specifically wants Shanaz to take this one. But Daisy, you should also be free to take it up. What will be the difference between climate change, environment, and disaster risk reduction, if there is any difference at all?
Great. Thank you so much for that question. So the truth is that there is significant overlap between these definitions, which is why countries are moving towards, integrated approaches. So for instance, disaster risk reduction is about reducing risks that are related to natural disasters. But in Africa, for instance, 90% of disasters are climate related. So there'd be a very small fraction of disasters which would be non-climate related, like an oil spill or the pandemic or something like that. So that's one, I suppose, thing. And I will actually put a link to the UNDRR guide in taxonomy to integrated climate budget tagging for climate change and disaster risk reduction, which basically shows, the overlapping layers, but also those that are independent of each other. I hope that helps answer the question. Thanks. And I'll put the link in the chat.
All right.
Thank you, Shanaz. I just want to jump in, Richard, and offer a very simplistic answer because I work at community level. So people use climate and environment interchangeably, but they are not really the same, but they are related. Climate, just think of it, well, what comes to mind is water, rainfall, and temperature. That's climate, right? And what happens in the atmosphere. Environment, you are looking at your land, your air, your water, your biodiversity. And you can actually use that to adapt to climate change or to mitigate climate change, what we call nature-based solutions. And disasters, you are looking at your floods, your droughts, your heat waves. I hope it's now clear because Shanaz gave a very good explanation, but I'm just giving you examples. So yes, people who use that interchangeably, climate and environment, but they are not really the same thing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daisy. And thank you, Shanaz. Colleagues, we have about 4 minutes to wrap up this session. If we could get a question or two coming through, we'll be very happy. Otherwise, I want to share a final slide with you just on the way forward on what to expect for the next presentation. So, Anna, if you can hear me, could you kindly share the last slide with us? Thank you. Shanaz put this there. All right. All right. So, colleagues, this is for our next webinar, which will be happening on the 23rd of June. We are going to be looking at beyond the numbers, impact of climate change beyond the numbers. And we ask a few questions of ourselves as public sector auditors, whether we understand the clarity of these climate performance indicators, if there are any in our countries or anything. Are the climate finance tracked separately from general spending? Most importantly, whether communities, women, and youth are benefiting from climate investments. And this is very key, especially from our principles in auditing on Intosai P12, which talks about bringing value and benefits to citizens. So we could be spending, but are we getting the benefits? Or we are looking at spending just because climate has become a buzzword, it has become a very good avenue for raising finance for our governments or other things. So we're going to have a speaker. Is actually Dr. Kumar, Dr. Animesh Kumar. He's the head of the United Nations Disaster Risk Reduction Office in Bonn, in Germany. He has also graciously agreed to take us through this webinar on the 23rd of June in 2026. We look forward to having all of us here. Join this our friend also, Dr. Kumar from the UNDR office, to take us through some of this. Dr. Kumar is a climate change specialist, but he has also done some work in disaster risk reduction. And that is where we get a lot of what is actually happening beyond the numbers and how we need to approach them as auditors in the climate change conversation. So we look forward to seeing all of you on the 23rd of June. We'll put out the registration details on all our social media handles. We shall send them to the mail. We shall send them to your offices, and we'll make sure that you have access to all of the information you need to be part of this conversation. And we look forward to seeing you for this one. I think there's a bit of a challenge with the link. Sorry, some people are unable to access the link, but yeah, Shanaz gave an answer here, so I hope it works well for all of us. But yeah, that should be it from us in AFROSAI. Thank you very much to Shanaz and to Daisy for taking time off your very busy schedules to take us through this. We were expecting the Office of the Philippines to join us for more practical examples, but like Daisy mentioned, they were unable to make it this time. So we are making efforts to get them to join us for the next one. So at least while we look at beyond the numbers, they can share with us from the auditing perspective what benefits they have been able to accrue in looking at the budget tracking in climate change. Thank you so much for joining. And Aneri, is it possible that we can take a group photograph? If colleagues, if we can all kindly put our cameras on, we can put our mics off and put our cameras on. We'll just take a few shots on the screen, and hopefully we should get some memories to share. So let's take a few shots. Please put your cameras on, and then we shall take a few shots. And do well to smile. It's just a Tuesday, guys. All right. So Aneri will take us through this one.
No problem, Richard.
About outside the camera there.
You don't. Quite a few cameras on. I'm going to be taking a few pictures just through the whole gallery. So if you can hold still, and as Richard said, a smile would be welcome.
Andrew, you're not smiling.
Just hold that for a
Right.
few minutes more, please. A few seconds more. All right. I think I've got everybody that's got their cameras on. Thank you so much.
Right. Thank you very much, colleagues. And do have a beautiful day. If you have any questions, anything you want to still know, do well to send us a mail at AFROSAI-E, and we are too willing to respond to your mails. Thank you, and God bless you all. Have a nice day. Thank you, Shanaz, and thank you, Daisy.
Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank
you.
you. Thank you. Bye.